All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to what we call Relearned. This is episode 26. It's a special episode for many reasons. This is being recorded right in the thick of turmoil within our country, and importantly, not something that has just happened magically overnight. And that's part of the powerful conversation I think we'll have today. So, me and Glenn are welcoming a good friend of ours, a colleague, and someone we actually had on as an early guest, and we now get to call him Dr. Bobby Gueh. Dr.
First
Gueh, how
guest.
are you tonight?
Thank you. My pleasure and an honor to be here with you brothers.
It's so I actually want to set this up correctly. So there's a couple of things that I want to do first, and one of the first things is that we had a chance to talk before this, and that was an important conversation to make sure that this whole recording really it goes the way that it's supposed to in terms of it puts the right thing forward in the conversation. And we don't have a huge audience, but when me and Glenn kind of talked about what we wanted to be able to do, we wanted to provide a platform. And really, you're one of our strongest connecting points from not just the Black community, but from a scholar community within that as well. So that's another big reason why we wanted to have you back on.
And I mean, just thinking about the work that you've done in the community, in the Lanier community, with so many students, so many young men, so many, just such a big voice, a big influence for that, for many years. And it's just something that, like, I have so much respect for. It's like Kyle said, it's just important that we use what platform we have for you.
Yeah.
And this is the last thing I'll say before I ask my big question, but part two of that is I also want to acknowledge that to some degree, we as well-meaning white men are, whether we want to care to admit it or not, there's a little bit of virtue signaling that happens with something like this. There's a little bit of that we're trying to placate our own worries and anxieties about what's going on. And I just want to acknowledge that up front. While that is not the intent of the conversation, certainly part of why we want to have the conversation is to grow and to learn, of course. But in the wrong context, obviously, this can look like, again, the well-meaning white person trying to placate themselves, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now that that's out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Just tell us how you're feeling, man. What's going on?
Yeah, man. Like I mentioned, a lot of respect for you brothers, and I know you guys are revolutionary educators, in the trenches doing the work. I've witnessed, I've had the pleasure to witness and see the work that you both do, and I applaud you. And absolutely a lot of respect for it. Just being courageous to take these steps to have this conversation. But beyond this, I know that you guys are going to continue to do the work, and really, be intentional, active, doing the work, in regards to the situation we're in. Great question, Kyle. I think when we spoke last week, I was mixed emotions, brother. I think I went from Malcolm X to Stokely Carmichael to Dr. King to you name it. So, I had a mix of emotions last week. It still do, because even I think the assumption is for most people, a lot of the calls that I've been getting and just people reaching out, it's almost like folks are reaching out almost like I have the answer, right? And folks got to understand, Black folks don't have the answer. Let me just put that out there. We've been struggling with this thing for over 400 years, and we have literally struggled. We have begged, we have fought, we have scratched to get to the point we are. When this massive crisis, demonstration, murder, or crisis happened, and unfortunately, it was back to back with the Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. Let's call these folks names out, and then George Floyd. I think the combination of those things, it was like a powder keg just waiting to explode, and that's what we're seeing right now. But I want folks to be really clear. when we're being reached out to almost like, what do we do in this type of situation? Black folks are like, we're trying to figure. For me, when everything went down and it became heightened, that became a frustration for me, you know, and I felt myself, you know, kind of going silent and just wanted to kind of back away and kind of deal with me, my own emotions, because it was the grieving process I was dealing with. So it's like, I'm grieving. I just, and if we know the stages of grief, and we know when we've dealt with people who've gone through grief, you're not going to ask that person how they're going to help themselves. The best thing you do with somebody that's grieving is give them space, you know, because we all grieve in a different form, in a different way, you know. So I was getting bombarded by these questions from well-meaning white folks and folks that I've known for years, you know. I love you as a brother and sister, you know, but I'm like, hold up. Sister hit me up and was like, hey, we got to put a presentation together for the, you know, for, I'm like, oh, a brother is leaving right now. You know, it was like, forget your feelings right now. Forget that impact of systemic racial killing and murder and raping that you guys have dealt with for 400 years, and all that is just like slamming on you right now. Put that to side and go, folks, figure this thing out. That's how I was reading it. Yeah. So the last few weeks I had to do a lot of soul searching. I had to do my own support group type of thing and connect with some folks that were on the same wavelength. Helped me just kind of have that balance in the last few days, because it was becoming extremely overwhelming. And you're thinking in your head, you know, I have to deal with myself right now. I have to deal with my family. I have to go through, I'm not thinking about anybody right now, you know. And I think, again, well-meaning white folks weren't they weren't connecting the dots on that point. And they were reaching out to, and they knew, to either give condolences, which was great. I'm fine with that. But then it was to follow up with, what can I do? I don't know what you can do right now. If you see a murder happen, if you see a dog getting killed, you would know what to do. If you see any kind of evil happening and injustice happening that's not regarding a Black person, the natural humanity in you will push you to do something, because that's a human being. That's something that is important to you. So I started to even wrestle with that question, like, all right, you know, if it was another person or you know, something else that you really cared about, you would absolutely do something automatically, because that's just your human heart that's moving you to do something, you know. And I think the conversation of racism in this country has become, you know, we're calling it a hard, brother, but, you know, I think some people are just afraid of it. You know, it's Black people have been having that conversation from the time we entered this world, man. You know, so it should not, and it's not an institution we created. So it's like, stop people that have been abused, go to the people that created. I was talking to my sister the other day. I gave the example of, let's say you purchase an appliance, air conditioner, refrigerator, and that refrigerator goes down. More than likely, you're going to look in the manual and try to figure out who to reach out to that can fix that refrigerator. You're not the expert. You don't know nothing about a refrigerator, but put food in it and take food out. But as far as that, you have to go to the manufacturer or the person that creates, you know. So that's sometimes, you know, I'm to a point where I have to kind of put it in plain language so people can kind of understand, you know. And you know, so I think with all that said, my brothers, that's kind of captured where I'm at. You know, I've gone from real revolutionary, radical, like, you know, hell with this, you know, just leave me alone, to, you know, coming to a point that I went through my grieving process, or the stages of grief. You know, and I'm blessed to have a platform, any little impact and word I can have to at least move the needle a little bit with this issue that we're dealing with, you know, as a nation, as a world, you know, then you know, I feel like that's ultimately my obligation to leave this world a better place for my boys. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, it's easy to appreciate where that is, and it's interesting because talking to you now versus last week, there is a dramatic difference kind of in where I can kind of hear the tone and the heart of where you are. But there is something you said in our conversation about how Black men feel, right? And there's something that you used an important word, and the reason why it struck me, and I've been wrestling with it and reflecting on it since we talked, because it's not a way that I've ever thought about how a Black man feels about who they are as a person, or particularly in this country. Do you remember what I'm kind of alluding to? Because I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but you can kind of remember.
I don't know if I use inferiority complex.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I was kind of hoping you might speak a little bit to that, because I don't know that enough people understand that that is part of where this comes from in terms of how this reaction, this feeling about everything.
Yeah, no, great point, Kyle. And let me just you know, note that there's inferiority complex, and then there's the superiority complex as well.
Right.
You know, that white folks are, you know, some white folks are suffering from. It's almost that, you know, you may call it white privilege, however you want to call it, but it's that superiority complex of ownership, right? And you do have some white folks who do have that, you know, that mindset. When you think about the police officer that was kneeling on George Floyd, his stance, you really watched and saw his stance, or you saw a photo of it, but his facial expression almost speaks to that superiority complex. Like if you, and I don't know if you guys have seen a picture of hunters have gone hunting, or you see them put a knee on their deer or their game that they've caught.
Yeah.
You have that power over that animal. And that was the impression that he showed on that, you know, during that time. You know, so that's that superiority complex that I think a lot of white folks, you know, struggle with. And it doesn't have to be blatant like that. It doesn't have to be out in the open like that. It could be something as I mentioned, going through this PhD program, I've had two white folks say to me, I've been blessed to struggle through this program and now being called Dr. Bobby Gueh. And two white folks in the last month have said, oh, wow, you're Dr. Bobby Gueh. You're already looking smarter. So I'm like, God damn, brothers, edit and take out everything you need to take out. But I'm like, wow. So maybe I didn't look smart before the PhD. So the reason I wrestle with that, Kyle, that goes back to what we call inferiority complex. That complex is something Friends for None. If you ever get a chance, there's a book. Friends for None was a radical revolutionary psychiatrist out of Martinique, but did a lot of his work in France. And he wrote a book called Black Skin, White Mask. And in that book, what he denotes is Black people have been systematically conditioned to think that white is better than them. Understand what I'm saying? Systematically conditioned. And we can take that history back from slavery to Jim Crow, and we can list all the things through the history. You talk about history of being told that you were less than a human. And then when you witness your parents live through that as a child, it rubs off on you. There's a lot of systemic barriers that, you know, the youth over the years had to break. That cycle of inferiority had to be broken. And that's something that Black folks got to do for themselves. I can't be empowered by a white man to tell me that I'm good enough. Bobby Gueh is not looking for that. Bobby Gueh is not going to look for that. You know, so Black folks have to really look deep into themselves and empower themselves, because the story the lies of that you're not good enough, the lies that we can call them stereotype. Black folks, are not good writers. I've heard that. Black folks. You heard some of our black women have been told, you're beautiful for a black girl. Can you imagine? So those things are systemic things that you've heard, you've witnessed over time. So you're constantly in this fight to show your worth. So it has to be something internal. So that inferiority complex he talks about, Franz Fernandez, in one of his chapters I remember vividly, he gave the example like this. He said, if you have a black child born into this world, the minute that black child come into contact with a white person, that black child immediately feel that inferiority. Now, what is that, right? Those are things that have systematically been told because of how black folks were treated. You can even go back to Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife when they did the doll test. If you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah, I've heard about the doll test.
Absolutely. So you had young black children were asked the question, which one are more beautiful? They would pick the white one. So that's something that me personally, I really wrestle with. And I know a lot of black people in conversation, wrestle with that, trying to debunk that myth of not being good enough. So that's a strong fight, and that's a plight that we're on now, man, and we're still on it to this day. So that's in a nutshell what we call inferiority complex. And again, yeah, we do have a lot of black folks that are doing well. We do have a lot of black folks that are, doing absolutely well financially, spiritually, physically, and so forth. But there's something that's embedded in us, man. And again, it's because of this systemic view that we see all the time that white is right. I think I gave you the example last week, Kyle. I was watching a 2-hour show, and in that 2-hour show I watched, every commercial was a white person in it. I didn't see one black person. So again, nothing wrong with it from the naked eyes, but if I'm constantly seeing white people shine in a positive light, black people being shined in a negative light, what does that do for the psyche? What does that do with the psyche? So there's a lot of emotional trauma that black people have to kind of wrestle with, and we put on, and it goes back to Franz Fernandez, we put on this mask and we go to work, we smile, we get through it. That's what we've done for over 400 years, so, that's a long answer to your question, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another piece of systemic racism that is not often talked about, is not brought to the forefront, as far as those psychological trauma that has happened to black and brown folks, throughout throughout this experience.
And me and you had a conversation, probably a couple of years ago, but you had been looking at and talking and wrestling with the genetic imprint of all of this.
Yeah.
And that there's research out there now that, of course, that talks about there's generational trauma that gets embedded, almost in people's DNA, right?
Yeah.
And you may not want to speak deeply on that, but as you talk about that, I think back to that conversation we had, and it was brief, it was kind of in passing, but it was something that I know that had just been tickling your mind as you were in the middle of some of your doc stuff too. So I don't know if there's anything to expound on that, but I think there's something to be said for that. There is research out there saying this is not just this mental trauma that we carry around. There's something biological about what's happened in the last 400 years due to all of this as well.
Yeah, because there's research that is passed on, that's out there on the trauma that are generational trauma. You can go do your Google search. Generational trauma is a real thing. So for example, you have a black mother, right? living in the urban hood, in the urban ghetto, and we know some of the social impediments that happen, due to poverty, due to, the lack of resources and access. When that mother born that child, have that child, more than likely, due to those traumatic social impediments throughout, that mother's life, that stress is passed down to that child. So that child is coming into a system and, already stressed out, so, these are real things that do happen. Obviously, you have to consider the environment as well. And the environment is a real thing to consider. I've worked in urban ghettos, if we want to call them ghettos today. And that's a different beast. We're here, we're relaxing in Sugar Hill. Sugar Hill ain't seen nothing yet. You go into some of these hardcore, ghettos and concrete jungles, and really see some of the true institutional racism. That's why I think it's a disconnect sometimes, Kyle, from educators. And I'm gonna speak to the system that we're in. When you're not really seeing the institutional struggle systemically in the ghetto, you're far removed from it. You're either watching it on TV or you're reading it in a book. You truly don't understand systemic and institutional racism until you actually live in the ghetto. And the reason, and you can see it, right? The conversations and other places you may not see it. But if you actually want to see it and witness it, go to Southwest Atlanta right now. Go to some of the inner cities of Chicago. Go to some of the inner cities of New York, New Jersey, and the list goes on. You will see institutional racism full-fledged in front of you. But when we're living in the suburbs, or we're, on these outskirts, and we're not really living in that, in that world, it's only theory. It's only theory. It's theoretical. So we're truly not understanding what it really means.
And I mean, just to speak from a little bit of a white perspective on that, in Sugar Hill or in these communities, is we look at those places which are suffering from that extreme institutionalized racism, and it's almost from a place of, I mean, that's where the stereotypes come in. That's where, we like make excuses, or we figure out ways to write that off as, there must be something wrong with those people, or there must be something wrong with, their way of life, or the choices they've made, or there's so many different little aggressions that happen, that those get passed down in Sugar Hill. Those get passed down in the affluent communities as ways of justifying and kind of continuing this narrative. And that's what's happening in people's homes, like here around us in our communities, that kind of allow that to continue. It's what I was raised on personally.
I've heard your story. And that's why I think is as educators, man, is very, very, and I'm glad we're having this as educators, and really encourage that the conversation go beyond this, because we have all type of students coming in our classroom, in our schools, from different backgrounds, so, really understanding systemically where they're coming from, institutionally, where they're coming from, their history, their background. We can't do one brush stroke on every student no more. Those days are over. We have to take time to truly understand the background of every student that we come across. And I think if we really talk about anti-racist education, we have to put the time into doing that, because you're not going to understand that student's plight covertly or overtly, however it presents itself. You're not going to understand it if you don't take a moment to really dig into, their background and their story.
So this leads me to something that's important too, that when we talked last week, there's something that you brought up. You know, you talked very briefly about critical race theory, but
Yeah.
there is a component of critical race theory that you brought up that I think we need to hear, one, but two, that's important how it plays out in education, because it means we have to look very critical lens of how we develop and run classrooms and the representation that is developed there. So I'm assuming you know what I'm alluding to there as well.
Yeah,
So I'll
no,
let you
absolutely.
speak to that. Yeah.
No, absolutely, Kyle. You know, critical race theory is a theoretical approach that you know, I've kind of taken a liking to. It has its pros and cons, and you have critics on every theory out there. But the tenet of it that really speaks to me is its major tenet that says that systemic racism is permanent. Systemic racism is permanent. What does that mean? That means that this system that we call this land, we call America, was built on a system of oppression, on a system of racism, on a system of exclusion, on a system of hatred, and the list goes on. It was built on that. So it is ingrained in the fabric, the very fabric. Even, you know, when we talk about some of the, the major documents of this country, we can pick it apart and look at some of the systemic structures within the Constitution, Emancipation Proclamation. We can pick those things apart and look at how systemically racism have played a role in every factor of this country's history. You can't pull one factor of this country's history and and not see racism in it. Not one. If you can do it, please help me find it. You know, when we talk about education, when we talk about housing, when we talk about medical, land, you name it. Every factor of the history, every factor of this country's history, racism plays a role. So critical race theory says that it is so woven into the fabric of this nation that it's permanent. If we can come to that conclusion that this thing is permanent, there's no absolutely destroying it. What we can do is disrupt it. And that's what we've been doing for the last, over 400 years, just trying to disrupt it. As we disrupt it, we pass it down to another generation and hopefully continue the movement of disrupting it. So that's a critical piece. And how we see it in the school, I mean, so many ways. Let's look at the disparity of, Black and brown kids in AP courses versus white kids that are in AP courses. Let's look at, how in certain institutions or school districts, and let's talk about education as a whole. And you talk about the achievement gap. Why are Black students constantly behind or below this quote unquote achievement gap? Those are systemic things that have been put in play, systemic things that have been impeding these students for and families for decades. We see it in the schools. This is one that happened to me, like, in Jersey when I first started, when I was working with some high school students then. They didn't say it, but the Black athletes was so critical in the school because it promoted their athletic department. But when it came down to the social, emotional, academic well, Black young men, nobody was taking interest in it. So when I first got into, education back then, I'm like, and being conscious, I'm like, all right, these are kids who are just trying to do what they do, basketball, football, whatever it is. They're getting these accolades on the field, on the court, but they're failing their classes. Nobody was taking the time to really push them academically. So these are some of the systemic structure that people don't talk about, but it's embedded in there. Yeah, they're good for us, for basketball. We could care less what happened academically. We will pass them along, just so they can play. Those things were happening. So, but those are some of the structures we see in there, man. And I'm not even going to go to the textbook. You guys are literature guys, I'm not even going to go there, because that's a whole different conversation, a whole different show, with the lack of diversity that we see within the textbook in representation of Black and brown, individuals within the textbook that we're teaching our kids from.
While you brought that up, though, just something that is like really been, and I jumped and I bought a bunch of YA books, young adult books, with like to diversify my curriculum in my classroom and whatnot. But like, thinking about it, bringing in books about trauma, right? That like are largely, maybe, they're amazing books, but they're books about trauma. Yeah. And a lot of them deal with very complex issues. And like, I've got, like, I don't know what your thoughts are on, but I mean, just bringing in books isn't the answer. If we're still going to apply a white gaze, we're still going to apply that systemic racism in our classrooms. Bringing in books isn't going to solve that. What we do in our classrooms as teachers, what we do in our classrooms with those lives, with our students, and what we do to kind of dismantle and disrupt the way school works. I don't know if just bringing in books is going to do it. I don't know.
Well, it's experience, right? I think that's what, Bobby, that's kind of what you're speaking to, right? Like, it can't just be about what we read. It can't be about just what we've watched on television. If we're not in community with Black folks, and especially if we never have an opportunity to connect with those who are in more urban situations, or in situations where, again, as you expressed earlier, ghettos, what have you, we can certainly empathize. Yeah. We're not going to really know.
Right.
And we can't really do the work unless we're working with the voices, we're working with the lives that, are in our classrooms. Like going back to what you said about systems in schools, just instead of addressing racism that exists inside of ourselves and our system, we would take Black students and put them in classes that are lower level, or that's how we address the achievement gap, is we just teach these students harder, not actually addressing what's causing the root, right?
Correct.
Is something you mentioned.
Correct.
Really getting at the root.
Correct.
So, and Dr. Gueh, I kind of think about your research, right? Your research wasn't about a classroom teacher, but if I remember correctly, your dissertation was very much focused on Black men getting into counseling and being representative in that space. So I don't know if you want to kind of use this platform to kind of weave that into some of this as well, but I feel like part of the representation issue, please redirect me if I'm wrong, is how many Black and brown men and women do we see in the classroom leading the conversation?
Yeah, no, great point, man. And, and a big part of what came out of that work, Kyle, was, really interrogating systemic racism. When we look at the lack of representation, you want to ask why, right? And the why boils down to systemically, and I'm going to speak directly to this field, counseling field. One of the requisites to get into the field, obviously, is to get your master's degree. Most institutions that are in this area, you have to do the program full-time, meaning that you cannot work full-time because they have classes at 9 o'clock in the morning. A majority of the participants that I interviewed, they had families by the time they decided to go into the field. Well, they got to work and put food on the table. So there's a systemic structure right there. When we talk about the testing and those things that are needed to go into the field, when you look at the financial responsibility to go into the field. So all those things become systemic barriers, because we keep asking the question, why are there not a lot of Black males within the field were asking this question. We need to find out why. Let's go to the teachers. Black male teachers are great role model. We talk about them being role model for Black males, and that's a different discussion as well. I personally don't like to automatically think that a Black male in the building should automatically become the mentor for Black boys. That's a different conversation. You got to have the heart and compassion for mentoring. I don't care what color you are, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
But Black men traditionally, understand, when you've seen your family struggle through segregation, through the civil rights movement, through a lot of the institutional barriers that your parents had to struggle through, it's a message they send to you of wanting you to economically and financially have a strong foothold when you leave the nest. So Black families push Black men, go into the field that's going to earn you the best wages. That was a conversation that our parents were having with us as Black boys. So education wasn't that going, because we know financially it's not broadcast like that, right? So you either was thinking that you wanted to be a doctor, an engineer, and that might be a general conversation period just for males, but I know that conversation is even heavier when it comes to Black males, to try to be that strong man, for your family financially. That was the important thing, for Black men. So for some of us that kind of went the route of education, there was a added conversation of servant leadership that was being had. I know for me personally, in my decision to go into education, but that work really, for me right now, hopefully it becomes an awareness, a conversation that is being brought out more within this counseling profession, of the lack of diversity that we see represented within school counseling, period. It's heavily dominated by white females, then white males, and then people of color, Black folks, are kind of, treading, the coming down the pipe. But that's a major piece that I think our national organization, ASCA, and I'm going to call them out, GSCA, our state organization, we need to start paying attention to, if we're going to really talk about conversations and anti-racist education and the role counselors play into that. We really need to look at our makeup. We really need to look at our makeup and see how we can start to intentionally bring more diversity, to the profession.
So I want to talk, if it's all right by you, the anti-racist piece, right?
Right.
I think that there is a wide gap in knowledge. We'll talk again, whether we're talking about a well-meaning white person with great intentions versus someone who is choosing to be ignorant about what's going on there and what it means to act in an anti-racist way. And again, I don't expect you to be the voice box for all of the Black community here. That's not really what I'm after. But if you can speak a little bit to what that movement means and what it means to be anti-racist, I know it's going to help me.
Well, I'm gonna make it real short. Anti-racist, and this is Bobby Gueh definition of it. Y'all can go Google and whatever folks want to do to kind of dive into a little more. But I see anti-racist as being active. It's not passive.
It's a verb.
And that's pretty much the stamp that I put on it. You have to be active. And that activism could be something that is done, like Glenn mentioned, disrupting it in a small way of just bringing in different materials within your classroom. The active piece could be, finding out an organization that is catered, and one of their primary agenda is to, support, provide support for Black and brown folks. Join that organization of just donating money, right? That's going from, I'm not racist, I'm going to donate and help this cause, versus, you know what, I'm going to join it. I'm going to attend meetings. I'm going to get deep into what their cause really is, and see what I can do to be active. And that activism piece is, to me, the greatest anti-racist initiative that anyone can take, black, white, it doesn't matter who you are. If you call yourself an anti-racist educator or whatever the case may be, you better be active doing something, not just talking about it, but really active.
Yeah. If I want to be gut level honest, where I've struggled, and I've been this way about social media for a long time. Social media is a really powerful platform to get out the word. And I don't want to discount that, but there is some disingenuousness that I feel comes out of, again, mostly white folks, when it comes to the reaction that we're seeing online. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is well-intentioned, and it's part of me is excited to see this conversations happening in this way. And I told this to you actually when we were in that previous conversation a week ago of like, hey man, I got people in my family who normally aren't willing to admit, hey, this is really bad and wrong, who are finally doing that. So there's a window of opportunity, which is exciting.
Yeah.
But there is part of me that wrestles so hard with let me put out my post today that shows I'm anti-racist, right?
I hear you, brother.
Yeah. Like, I mean, these are conversations, everyone reaching out to you now. These are conversations like, why now? Why not sooner? Why not?
Yeah.
It is really frustrating.
No, that
you see that as a white person, seeing other white people do that, and I can't even imagine what that feels like. Wearing different skin. So
yeah, man, the Kyle. I mean, boy, folks are posting, boy. You see from the time you wake up. I mean, they're posting it. And I have my own little checklist. I'm gonna see when this thing died down, because it will. The media, our media, they're going to go to something else when this thing died down. I'm going to see where all the activists, where they're going to be, and all the people posting and hashtagging, where they're going to be. So my hope now, I don't know if you guys get a chance, if you have cable or whatever, there's the OWN network, Oprah OWN network.
Yep.
She's doing a pretty cool town hall. It's a 2-part. You can probably, pull it from demand. But they had a conversation last night, and one of her final questions to the panel was, do you all feel hopeful right now? A majority of people felt hopeful. And as I listened to them, I felt that same hope, right? Initially, I didn't. And this is last week when we talked, Kyle. Initially right. I was in a different headspace. But I had to check myself over the last few days and say, Bobby, if your ancestors can go through slavery, go through lynching, go through Jim Crow, go through water holes and dogs, and in their heart of hearts, all those things they were doing, they knew that they weren't going to see or reap the benefits themselves. But their hope was their children one day will reap the benefit. That's the realization that had to really hit me in the last few days to say, all right, Bobby, this is not for you. This is for my children's children. So whatever little I can give, whatever little energy, whatever little addition that I can add to this fight, I'm going to add it. I'm going to put it, so that's the hope I have. I think this incident is one that none of us have actually witnessed in person. Yeah, we saw the history of, the civil rights movement, and we've seen those things happen on TV and video and documentaries. But to witness the demonstration across the globe, I don't think we've seen anything like this, in our lifetime, Kyle and Glenn. Yeah. So with that said, I think that I do feel hopeful. I do feel hopeful that in the time of my boys, once they get to a point where they're able to, be men and fathers, they will see a different world, different system. Will they still deal with some of the institutional racism? They will. And that's the belief I have, because this thing is woven and is built on there, on that institution. They will still see it. How they will see it, how it'll look, may not be the way that I see it and how I've experienced it myself. Fortunate for them, their privilege is that they are growing up in Sugar Hill. They didn't have to grow up in Trenton, New Jersey like I did, and be sprayed by police officers walking home from school, and put in a police car and questioned just by walking black. Being called the N-word by a group of white boys. I'm cutting through a neighborhood that we were told don't go through that neighborhood. It was a little street next to my town, predominantly white. You can't get caught in that little town, after dark. It was up north, Italian, a heavy Italian population community, and they were very racist. And we were told by our parents, do not get caught after dark. And I got caught one day and was called the N-word and was being threatened by a group of white boys. So they hopefully won't experience those things, but they may see it in a different form. But I do have hope, man. We're really on a crossroad right now with this situation, that a lot of good can come out of it. I'm just sitting back and seeing, what people are going to do individually first, right? That's the biggest advice, man. Start individually. Start at your home, start at your dinner tables, and then work your way out, because this issue it's not going nowhere. It's here. I think our natural instinct is just to go fix things, let's fix it right now because we're upset, breathe, and settle in for the long haul.
Yeah. And it'll be a long haul. And what you just said is part of what resonated with me again with our conversation. So again, when we had our conversation last week, a lot of emotions. You were, like you said, you were kind of moving through all the phases.
Yeah.
But in one part of that conversation, when you did say, it's like, look, I'm not loving the fact that I'm keep getting this question from my folks, like, well, what can I do? But when you were providing an answer, it leads right back to what you just said. It starts in your house, right? Yeah. How do your kids see you act right now? What conversation are you having with your children?
Yes.
And that's the one thing we have full control of in our community is our own house.
100%.
So
100. And Cobb, that to me is the most important advice I've been giving people. That right there, because like I mentioned before, even for some of us Black folks, we're still grieving to the point that we're trying to just figure out our own grief. But we know there are allies, folks out there who are absolutely, showing that sense of humanity and want to do something, but it's heavy, it can get draining really quick. Imagine this becomes your life mission from the time you were born, it gets draining really quick, so, that's the greatest advice I can give anyone right now, man. Just how you talk to your kids, how you teach your students and your kids, your family about this topic, this issue. And then if you have any other influence anywhere else, in a church, in an organization, then you go there, you go to that next level, but starting at home.
Yeah. Well, hey, Bobby, thank you, sir. This was, it was much needed from the standpoint of, again, when I think about trying to be active right now, this is one of the ways I want to be active. We created this platform originally because, honestly, me and Glenn were a little stressed out about going into this world of remote learning, and this was a way of us controlling our space.
Yeah.
But it has evolved into something that, one, we enjoy doing, but two, now we have a little bit of a platform, and so this is one way to be active.
We've been sharing best practices with teachers, and absolutely. I mean, this is best practices. This is continuing that work. And we've been finding experts. We've been finding people that can speak on different topics, and we're so thankful that you were willing to come and speak with us.
No doubt, no doubt, brothers. Absolutely.
Respect.
Absolutely, man. And I thank you guys. I've had a chance to rest. I've had a chance to grieve. Kyle, thank you for letting me unload on you last week.
It was good, man.
Thank you for letting me get it out. I really appreciate that, man. And we have to just capture this moment. I encourage folks to do some of their own history. The history is so important. And here's why the history is important before, we kind of get off. The history is so vital because there's been a like a washing of the history, or I used in another conversation, or I think I did a video, I call it bleaching, like they bleached it. I gave the example of, when I watch these CSI shows, the murderer try to clean up and put bleach in, but they bring black light. Those forensics folks bring that black light and they shine that light on it, man. And when they shine that black light, they begin to see the stains of the murder, of the killing. And that's where we are now. Folks are shining that light on the injustices that have happened through institutional racism, and is now being, so do the history, dig deep into the history, understand how we got here, because a lot of folks have forgotten. A lot of folks are not aware, how can this happen? I even had a lot of folks that would say, I can't believe this has happened. I can't believe, dude, where have you been, under a rock?
Yeah.
I can't believe our country is like that. What? So folks got to do the history. So
that's our privilege, right? I mean, that's literally the definition of privilege, is you get to be oblivious.
That is.
Yeah,
oblivious.
we get to learn about it in a book, not live it every day.
Or just be flabbergasted that how could this possibly happen now? It's 2020.
It's 2020,
I mean, racism clearly died in the 1960s, right?
There's laws against this stuff.
I mean, I guess we got to laugh about it a little bit. Otherwise, it's pretty maddening. But, we've got a lot of work to do. I'm hopeful because I feel like this conversation, as well as future conversations, the way I'll talk to my daughter, the way I know Glenn will be talking to his daughter, the way that we'll have conversations with extended family. This is what it's all about. And you don't want these big events to be the reason these things move forward, because that's not the way it should be. But we know human history, again, tells us this is unfortunately what it tends to take. So let's make history, right? Let's start that process and make history.
We're making it now. We're in it. You know what I'm saying? We're in it. So this is a moment that is going to be written in the history books. And when it's all said and done, what side of justice do you want to stand? That thing that we all should ask ourselves, that question. And what role are we going to play when the history book has been written and the story has been written? When our children's children read about this moment, you can say, look, I had an imprint, I had something to say, I had something to do, during that moment, and I think each of us have an opportunity to do so, man. But brothers, I love y'all, man. You guys are great. I appreciate what y'all doing. Continue to do it. Anytime, anywhere, have this conversation, man. Absolutely.
Thank you for your voice, and thank you for continuing to use the gift that you've got, because I know this is probably conversation 1,000, out of what you've been doing in the last couple of weeks. But we appreciate it. God definitely has blessed you, sir, and I'm glad that you're willing to share that gift with us tonight.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, for everybody that's joined us for this episode, thank you for tuning in. If you have follow-up questions or things, you can find me on Twitter at the Prof Jones. You can find Glenn
at gchant668.
And Dr. Gueh, I'm sure we will have you on again, and we'll be circling back on all kinds of things, hopefully not just related to this, but education and the way we're trying to change things systematically there too. So
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, stay safe and be careful out there, and we'll see you next time on Relearned.